welcome to Rands and Cents by 10x, a platform dedicated to the belief that all South Africans can understand fundamental financial decisions and make those decisions for themselves.
Morning, ladies and gents. My name is Simon Brown from a extremely cold Johannesburg this morning. I'm joined with Brett McKay from 10x Investments, warmer Cape Town climes. We're going to be talking today retirement, but in a different sort of guise. We're looking at what happens when you change jobs. You've got a job, you leave it. Many circumstances why you might. We'll delve into some of that, but essentially you're exiting one job and you've got a retirement saving that you've accumulated whilst at the job. And the question is, now what happened? What are the options? What are the processes? How does it all work? It can get technical. Brett and I are going to stay away from the overly technical components of it. We will dig into a bit of it perhaps in the Q&A, but we want to get the broad strokes working here. And secondly, if you've got questions, you're welcome to drop them into the Q&A box. We do have time for questions. Brett and I will probably be about half an hour or so, maybe 25 minutes. And from there, we'll take questions thereafter. What we're not going to do today is we can't do specific circumstances. You've got X issue or something like that. We're talking the concept, the process, those sort of things. We can follow up directly with 10x after. Brett, appreciate the time this morning. Thanks for bringing your expert wisdom to us today.
Morning, Simon. Thank you for having me.
I want to kick off with the first component around switching jobs. And I think a lot of folks are thinking we're probably doing that, I don't know, later in our careers, etc. But truthfully, what we're going to be talking today in terms of switching that job and what to do with any sort of retirement of investment we have is almost regardless of age. I was saying before we went on air, I exited my first formal job. I was probably 23 years old. At the time, I was told simply, hey, here's money. Do you want it? I wasn't told about alternatives. But this is, in essence, age agnostic. This is going to be relevant to anyone out there who currently has a job which is attached to a pension plan of sorts.
Yeah, that's right. I think people will leave jobs at all different ages. Very little you'll see someone work at the same company for a long time. We're going to chat about the kind of the options that they have and the various routes that they can take when they resign or leave their company.
Yeah, he actually just reminded me, my grandfather did his first job, joined at 18, retired at 65, same company his entire life. Except for when he was old, he took a break to go fight in a world war. Things were crazy back then. Okay, so you are exiting a job. We're talking here about resignation. This is not when you're retiring. We're talking about the resignation process. And in essence, you've got different options at that first step. Talk us through what some of those different options are to someone who's resigning from a position.
Yeah, perfect. So the first option is if you are leaving your pension or provident fund, your new company that you are potentially working for might have a pension fund or provident fund already set up for you. So you can transfer that fund to your new company. Another option would be to do a in-fund preservation. So you just park the funds with your current fund where they are. Another option would be to do a full withdrawal of the funds subject to tax. You can also do a partial withdrawal, and then the rest must go to a preservation fund. So you want to preserve the benefits for as long as you can. Obviously, there are tax implications if you do a withdrawal. We see that the tax can really eat away at your growth. So preservation fund in terms of the most tax efficient investment you can do.
And this, we're talking here on resignation. Is it different if you have been retrenched?
Well, typically with retrenchment, you'll get a severance package. It is different in terms of that severance package is taxed differently to your withdrawal from your resignation. So a severance package will be taxed at the same tax tables as the retirement tax tables. So the first 550,000 Rand is tax-free, and that will carry over through to your retirement.
Okay, got you on that. In many cases, folks will be going from one large corporate to another. You've touched on that. That's fairly seamless. You might be going to freelance. You might be going to a small company that potentially sort of doesn't offer a group scheme or something like that. What are the options for someone who's sort of exiting the sort of big corporate world to perhaps the smaller employment world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I typically get it from a lot of the younger clients who have started out at a smaller company, but they move companies and they don't have something set up for them. So what you then do is you go and open a retirement annuity in your personal capacity, where you're in control of the investment. You can decide how much you want to contribute on a month-to-month basis. And it just ensures that you keep that retirement saving ticking over. You don't want to lose out on time, especially, as you want to invest as early as possible. So yeah, keeping that retirement savings ticking over through an RA is a great way just to make sure that you have something at the end of the day as well.
That actually makes me think, because I remember my days working for a large corporate. There was a certain amount of my salary which they were taking every month. They were adding to it and putting it into a retirement fund. At that point, I thought that the percentage that they were doing overall was a little modest, and I was just essentially buying ETFs on the side. But I could also set up my own private, personal, in essence, Reg 28 retirement at someone like 10X. I could have the two running together if I can afford and if I want.
Exactly. And a good starting point for someone who's maybe starting out their career, just in terms of how much they should contribute. We typically say around 15% of your salary is a good starting point. Yeah. As you get older, that amount might get higher depending on if you started or not. You don't want to get to a situation where you maybe only starting in your 40s and your 50s, and you're suddenly going to contribute 40% of your salary just to make sure that you can retire with enough, in the next 20 or 30 years. So yeah, very important to get that going early, and just to keep the retirement savings ticking over.
You mentioned withdrawals at the resignation. It is one option. I think we've got a slide here which can help us understand potential implications. The temptation is real. There's a pile of money which you can take, and of course there's tax from it. But there's also a longer term implication in terms of the withdrawal and the impact on your ultimate savings. We've got the slide here, two individuals who took different routes. Talk us through it.
Yeah, 100%. So these two individuals, same job, same contributions into their retirement savings, James and Kanye. And what happened is, at age 35, they both had the option to take the savings out. James did. He took 144,000 Rand out, cashed it in. He did get the first 27,500 Rand tax-free, but he paid tax on the remainder. Then we kind of fast forward just to see what that impact had on the investment over time. Just because he took 144,000 Rand, at the end of the day, at age 65, it left him with, short of 400,000 Rand difference just by taking out 144,000 Rand. And that just really speaks to the compound effect of withdrawing and not leaving your money to grow and invest it. And this is really, the point of this kind of the session, is in terms of trying to understand the impact that, cashing out has on your lifetime investment. And it just shows you how much more you have at the end of the day, just by, making sure the funds are parked and still grow and still invested.
It's a great illustration, and it is that who doesn't want 144k? Of course, it disses you what, 400k short at retirement, and that's always the dilemma. You said the first 27,500 is tax free. Folks can find the tables on the SARS website. Is the tax thereafter, if my memory serves correct, it's a set rate? It's not based on your marginal rate or anything, or am I incorrect?
No, correct. It's based on the resignation tax tables. So the first 27,500 is tax-free, and then it goes up according to the lump sum that you withdraw. The next one is 18%, and so on.
Okay. I want to get to the vested, non-vested, but I'm actually going to park that for a bit, because that starts to get really complicated. We will come back to that in a bit. But there is one important point, which is the government employee pension fund. That has slightly different rules, as I understand.
Correct. So if you're leaving a GPF, or a government employee pension fund, those funds must be preserved in a pension preservation fund. It's just in terms of the way the rules are. So if you are exiting a government employee company, then the funds must go to a pension preservation fund, which then can be retired from, down the line after age 55.
Okay. And group RAs, again, can only be transferred into another RA. Is that correct?
Yeah. So group RAs, it's a smaller version of a provident fund or pension fund. Sometimes a company isn't big enough to have a provident fund or a pension fund, so they'll set up group retirement annuities and kind of pay the contributions for the employees. Right. So what happens is, if an employee leaves that company, they just basically carry on the RA in their personal capacity. So they can do lump sums into it from their bank accounts. They can set up a debit order into that. but basically separating it from their employer and having their own investment in their name. And then if they join a new company, they can maybe discuss with them if they're able to contribute into that RA on their behalf. Great product as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's touch on. I mean, so in essence, at resignation, you've got options to transfer, you've got options to withdraw. There are implications around that. The key one is then preservation fund. High level, what is a preservation fund?
Yeah, perfect. So it's essentially in the name. It's a product that's used to help people preserve their retirement savings until they retire.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to park your provident fund or pension fund. If it's a provident fund, it goes to a provident preservation fund. If it's a pension, it goes to a pension preservation fund. And yeah, like I said, it's a preservation fund to preserve your retirement savings. So when you get to retirement, you can convert those to the various kind of annuities that you get.
And importantly, the transfer into that, there's no tax implication. As far as Treasury is concerned, you're still within the retirement wrapper, so there's no implication in terms of that transfer.
Yeah, quite right. So there's a couple benefits. So obviously there's no tax when you transfer from your provident fund or pension fund to the preservation fund. The preservation fund also falls out of the estate. What's nice about a preservation fund in terms of the growth, there's no tax on the growth. And you also are able to do one full or one partial withdrawal from a preservation fund before retirement. So you have a little bit of flexibility as well, obviously subject to tax, but it's nice to know that you have some flexibility of being able to access your funds, whereas maybe an RA, as an example, you can't access those funds until age 55.
Are there restrictions in terms of partial, in terms of minimums or maximums?
No, so you can do, if you do a partial withdrawal, you can't do another withdrawal until retirement. Otherwise, you do a full withdrawal of the funds subject to tax.
And that is per fund or for the individual? If I've got, maybe I've been job hopping, so I've got a couple of them. Is it one withdrawal for Simon or one withdrawal for each of Simon's funds?
It's one withdrawal for Simon.
Okay. And another question in that regard, again, if I've been job hopping, I might already have a preservation fund. If I'm exiting an employment, could I take my latest pension and put it into the existing preservation fund?
Yeah, you can. So that's one of the benefits of a preservation fund. So say you have a provident preservation fund and you work for another company in a provident fund and you leave that company, you can then top up your existing preservation fund. Unfortunately, one of the cons with the preservation fund is you can't do monthly contributions into it, or you can't fund the account from your bank account. So a common question I get is, from a client who maybe open a preservation fund is, okay, now how do I add to it on a month-to-month basis? And unfortunately, you can't do that. But what we then say is go and open a retirement annuity. And I think a big misconception is you're splitting up the two funds now. You've got a preservation fund that's parked, and then you've got a retirement annuity that you're contributing to. But what's nice is you can choose the same underlying portfolio in each one. So 10% growth in that portfolio is 10% growth across the board. It also gives you a little bit of flexibility. As we said, you can do a withdrawal from a preservation fund. So you've got a fund now that you can maybe access if you need to for an emergency. And then you've got your retirement that's ticking away and growing over time.
Your preservation fund is, in essence, it's a Reg 28 fund, which might be one of the cons, or maybe it's one of the pros, depending on the listeners' a point on that. But essentially, it is, as you say, it is a Reg 28, and 10X offers both. You could have exactly the same bits in both.
Yep, correct. Yeah, so it is Reg 28 compliant, meaning maximum 75% in equities, 45% offshore. Depends how you see it, but it is Reg 28 like an RA.
And then, of course, the tax on withdrawal before retirement, but then at retirement, does it then sort of act the same as a normal retirement fund that you might have?
Correct. So before retirement, you can access the funds. As I said, first 27,500 Rand is tax-free. But then at retirement, different tax tables. It's the retirement tax tables, and that's your 550,000 Rand tax-free limit.
Am I still required to get an annuity from the preservation fund, a living or guaranteed annuity with the 2/3?
Yeah. So you're able to take a maximum of 1/3, with the first 550,000 Rand being tax-free. The remainder will need to be annuitized. So various options. You can look at a guaranteed annuity, a living annuity, multiple living annuities, or even some sort of hybrid if you'd like as well. And that's, like I said, that's for the remaining 2/3 that's not taken as a cash lump sum.
And folks, we've done webcasts before on the living annuities. Brett's mentioning when he talks about the living versus guaranteed, potentially having multiple living annuities as well. We can get those videos if you want. You can drop an email to the booking confirmation for this webcast. We can send you those for more details around that. In essence, what we're then saying is if we take the big picture again, if you are resigning from a company and you've had a pension scheme, you can withdraw. This recommendation is not to. I appreciate it's, personal circumstances might dictate differently. The recommendation is not to, and ultimately it's going into a preservation fund, which will then continue alongside your other investment. And there are some T's and C's, group RAs, but broadly into a preservation fund. And that then continues alongside your other retirement products that you've got. It sounds a lot complex, but actually, Brett, it's a fairly simple process.
Exactly. I mean, preserving is the biggest benefit. You want to make sure that you don't pay unnecessary tax. I speak to a lot of clients, and I think it's so easy for them to take 15, 20, 30,000 Rand. It doesn't seem like much in the bigger picture, but when you really compound that over time, it does have a big impact on your investment. And I think the more you have saved up and the more you have invested, the more eager you are to build it up. And it encourages you to learn more about your investments and understand how they work. Not only understand the markets, but the mechanics behind the investment. And if you cash out, it's kind of, it leaves you with nothing in terms of your investment. So it's very important to keep this going and keep ticking away. Yeah.
And the key point then is, so the folks on the webcast, then I understand the process. You're leaving your job, you're going to get a preservation fund. The question then comes in, well, okay, what preservation fund? How do I choose? It's going to be largely the same process of choice as you would for a Reg 28, a retirement annuity. Brett, talk us through some of the top things that folks should look out for when they're selecting a preservation fund.
Yep. Well, first thing I can say is the fees. So you want to try and get your EAC. I think we've got a slide, Simon, that we can maybe share now. And as you can see from the slide, it's really crazy to see how a fee can actually impact your investments. So we're basically showing two different investments here. The first, the top line, is a 1% fee charged on the investment, 100,000 Rand, invested over 40 years at a 6% return. And the other investment is a 3% fee. And just by changing your costs, it shows you how much of a hidden destroyer the fees are in terms of your retirement wealth. So EAC is definitely something you must request from the provider. EAC is typically made up, or effective annual cost is typically made up of administration charges, portfolio fees, and advice fees. There might also be performance fees depending on the underlying fund that you choose. And you can get this directly from your provider by asking for it. 10X has also got a fantastic EAC calculator on our website where you can go and understand the 10X EACs on the different products. And then we also offer a cost comparison report. So if you're not able to get your EAC, you can send us a statement and we'll do what we can to try and understand your EAC and look at the returns and do a competitive analysis on that investment. And EAC is massive destroyer of the wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, that difference in the graph there went somewhere. It just wasn't your pocket. It was somebody else's pocket. Yep. The important point as well is there's a lot of potential different fees. And they might be small, they might be big, they can add up. And I know some providers will give you this one or that one. EAC is, in a sense, the gold standard. That's the one you want from your provider, because that is what we sort of, it's apples with apples in a sense.
Yeah, it's the best way to compare your cost with another provider. It's a legal document that they have to provide to you. It is a summary of all the charges that they charge you. I speak to a lot of clients who will say, my fee is 1%, but then that's not necessarily the EAC. They might see an admin fee and they need to add the portfolio fee. So if you can get the EAC, effective annual cost, that's the best place to start in terms of analyzing if you're in the right place or not.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of, so you're moving, we've touched fees, EAC, that's the really important point. The next part is the asset allocation, the sort of the underlying investments. They're going to be Reg 28 compliant, but again, it's and I think as investors, we often we try and get too smart. We like, oh, look at the US, there isn't enough Japan as an example in this fund, etc. forgetting that this is really a long-term view. And with respect to President Trump, your time to retirement is probably longer than the sort of 3 years and 9 months left. But the key point is understanding those asset allocations and the underlying investments that are going to sit within your preservation fund.
Yeah, correct. I think it's very important to have the asset allocation correct. Younger investors, they need to be aggressive in terms of they want to beat inflation. And we know through history, to beat inflation, you need to hold equities in the fund. What's nice as well with the preservation funds and retirement funds is you can get low cost index funds through these products. What's nice about an index fund is, first of all, it's low cost, so the fees are very low on them. Plus, you also get that diversification risk. So it helps you, instead of being into a couple hundred companies, invest into a couple hundred companies, you invest into a couple thousand companies. So if something happens to one of those companies, you're not going to feel the effect like you would in maybe an active fund where the concentration risk is a little bit higher. And you just want to track the markets. You can try and outperform. It's very difficult to do so. So from our perspective, from 10x perspective, it's easier just to track the markets, make sure you're contributing, doing the right things, and paying low fees, and it will work for you at the end of the day.
Yeah, and the SPIVA, which is a Standard & Poor indexation versus active, which they compare active versus passive funds. They do it for countries around the world, including South Africa. And the data usually comes out that around about 15% of the active beat passive, 15% beat passive. And it's not always the same 15%. So it can get quite tricky in that regard. We've touched on the withdrawing in terms of the process. I just want to recap that because I think it's important for folks, is that you've got a preservation fund, you took up a second job, you've now got another Reg 28. At retirement, you've now got essentially two funds out there, perhaps with the same provider. They're both sitting at 10x. Collectively, Treasury is going to look at that as one sort of pot of money in terms of the 1/3, 2/3, in terms of the 550,000 tax-free.
That's right. So typically someone will consolidate their various funds, and it's not only preservation funds. You'll consolidate your retirement annuities. I've had clients with one provident preservation fund, a pension preservation fund, and an RA. And kind of the process is to consolidate. So take the first 550K and then consolidate the rest into an annuity where an income is paid. And I think another misconception about preservation funds is with regards to the age of 55. You can still do a withdrawal from your fund after age 55. It's not a retirement just because you're 55. You can still do a withdrawal where the withdrawal tax tables will kick in, not the retirement tax tables. Retirement is a completely different kind of process where the first 550K is tax-free.
And that's an important point. A Reg 28 retirement annuity, I can only access at 55. Same is true for my preservation. In many cases, the regulations are pretty much always in sync between the two, and that 55 age is important for when I want to retire.
Yeah, correct.
Let's go to some complexities now. The new invention that came in of September of last year is the two-pot system. How does this change things, if at all?
Yeah, so it does change things slightly. Basically, it kicked in on the 1st of September last year. What it means is all the new contributions into retirement funds are now split into three. So it actually probably should be called three-pot, but anyway, it's split into vested. So your vested pot, it's split into a retirement pot, and then it's split into a savings pot. And then basically what happened, so on the 1st of September, we all seeded 10% of our retirement savings into the savings pot, just to give it an initial kick. All the future contributions after that will be split. So just as an example, say you're contributing 1,500 Rand to your provident fund or to your retirement savings. 1,000 Rand of that is going to go to your retirement pot, and then 500 Rand of that is going to go to your savings pot. So it's a kind of a 1/3, 2/3. And then when you want to access your funds, so I think this is the main purpose of this, is being able to access a portion of your funds. You can only access the savings pot. However, it's taxed differently. It's taxed at the marginal income tax rate. So, investors just need to understand that it's not the same tax tables as a withdrawal or retirement. It's at their marginal income tax rate. And also, I think something very important to note is the savings pot itself. I think a misconception is that it's parked in money market or an income fund. It's parked in cash. But just because it's a savings pot doesn't mean that is the case. It's still actually invested into the same portfolio or into the markets that the vested and the retirement pot is in as well. I think a lot of people just think it's savings, so it's money market, but that's not the case. It's actually still going to grow according to the portfolio that it's invested in.
Yeah, it's perhaps bad language from Treasury. Perhaps they could call it the accessible pot, but that actually sounds even worse in some way. That actually
going to make it easier.
Ignore me in that regard. And there is an important point, and I again want to stress it. You did mention it, but when you withdraw from your savings pot, it gets added to your income, so it's your marginal tax rate. And if you've got any monies owing to SARS, they've got first dibs on it. So, I mean, I know folks who took 30,000 and SARS were like, yeah, no, thanks, you owe us 30. And essentially, SARS took it. And that is, I mean, that's not them being nasty. That is how the process works.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. I want to go down the rabbit hole. It is a rabbit hole. It gets quite technical. Vested versus non-vested.
Yes. Okay. So this is typically known as T-Day. So this, it happened from the 1st of March, 2021. And basically what it meant is all Provident Fund contributions from the 1st of March 2021 were going to follow the same rules as a pension fund, meaning only 1/3 of those contributions will be available at retirement. So if you were younger than 55 on the 1st of March, all the new contributions go to the non-vested portion. Your vested amount stays the same as you had before the 1st of March. However, if you're older than 55 on the 1st of March 2021, you're not affected by the rules. But yeah, it's just basically trying to harmonize the pension funds and kind of bring the Provident Fund in line with the pension fund and the annuitization when you eventually retire.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha. Okay. So, not quite perhaps as complicated as I thought. I thought there was going to be a lot more jargon there. Folks, if you've got some questions, drop them into the Q&A box. We certainly got time there. I've had one that dropped in on my Twitters, as is often the case. And it's really saying, if I'm at a corporate and I don't like their particular fund, can I decline and do my own? I'm not sure that's going to depend on your contract, I suspect, Brett. Most corporates, from my experience, say this is the fund we've got. You can augment with the separate fund, but you need to be in your contract. Probably says that you need to be in their particular retirement fund.
Yeah, that's a great question and quite a common question actually. And what you can do is you can lower your minimum to the minimum contribution amounts to that particular provident fund or pension fund, and then open a separate retirement annuity that you're happy with, that you can control the asset allocation. You can choose a provider with low costs. Most of the time, it's compulsory to contribute something, whether it's 3% or 5%. So what you can do, like I said, is just minimize that contribution to the minimum, and then open a separate fund where you can still contribute to and get the same tax deduction on that as well.
What costs, if any, are involved in moving into a preservation fund?
Well, from a provident fund to a provident preservation fund, there's no cost involved. Same with the pension to a pension preservation fund. It does depend on the provider as well. Some providers have upfront fees. 10x doesn't. So you just go on the website, set up the account, and then we'll handle the transfer for you. So it depends on the provider. Some charge transfer fees or initiation fees. It just, like I said, it depends on the provider that you pick.
Okay. And you mentioned an important point there, which is how that process works. If I'm leaving my job, who do I speak to move to a preservation fund? Do I come to 10x? Do I speak to my existing provider?
Yeah, very good question. So there's usually two steps in the process. The first step is to complete the exit form with your current employer. So, maybe in your last month, your last week of working there, they'll give you the forms and they're going to ask you, what would you like to do with your fund? That's when you make your decision. Okay, I'm going to go to a preservation fund. Then you'll put the company that you've chosen, their preservation fund details. At the same time, you can then go and open a preservation fund with a different provider, and get the account details from them that you can use on the forms. What's nice as well, 10x is we'll help you with those forms. So we guide you along the way. You've got a dedicated transfer administrator who will help you with the process. You don't want to be stuck doing forms all day. So it does help to have, someone specialized that can help you with that. But yeah, it is a fairly simple process.
Yeah, simple, but some of those forms are not. And I take your point. Someone who actually knows what some of that
Yes.
that jargon is. How long is the process? And does it matter? I mean, and I ask for this because I know what some folks are thinking. So I'm moving, and this moving takes, I don't know, a period of time, and then my money's in limbo, and markets are rallying, etc. I mean, is that a legitimate concern, or is it fairly frictionless?
Yeah, well, we can only start the process once your last contribution has gone in. So you might have everything set up and completed the forms, but there still might be another contribution that goes in at the end of the month. Typically, the transfer from provider to provider takes about 6 to 8 weeks. It does depend on how quick the HR is to get those forms through. Unfortunately, you are relying on HR to sign and the company to sign off on the forms, and then it's just a matter of letting the transfer departments do their thing.
Yeah, that's why I always buy your HR a cup of coffee. They're
Exactly.
In that regard. The other question is, okay, so not quite tied to what we're talking today, but is it possible to, if I've got a fund that exists already, a Reg 28, to change providers? And the answer to that is yes. I mean, we've chatted around this before in other webcasts. If I'm not liking my provider, for whatever reason that might be, changing is equally possible.
Yeah, that's correct. So you can transfer a preservation fund from one provider to another, or a retirement annuity via Section 14 transfer. Depending on the provider, there might be penalty fees or termination charges. We typically see those fees less and less nowadays. It's usually kind of the old school legacy products that have those high costs or exit costs. But you can switch from one provider to another. It's just a matter of setting up the account, and then, like I said, the various transfer teams will handle the transfer process.
Yeah, and I think many people have heard my story, but I'm going to tell it again because it still pains me and it's important. I had one of those legacy funds. When I tried to transfer it back in the day, I was told it was going to cost 30% of my fund. I just declined, and I kept on every 6 or 8 months going back, and then eventually I got a number that wasn't massively onerous. And I forget what it was now, actually. I think maybe I ended up paying 8 or something. But they were going to charge me 30%. And I just said, nope, not darling. And it seemed that they, with respect, were just making up numbers as time went on. And eventually I transferred it, and it worked better, and I'm well ahead because of it. Folks, I'm not seeing if there are any more questions. Quickly pop them in. We have recorded. The recording will be sent to folks within the next, what's today? Today's Thursday. Sometime tomorrow lunchtime. We will send it through to everyone so they can grab the recording. If you've got more questions, you can always head to the 10x website. You can also get hold of Brett and get more from him. Brett, a lot of this, I think we get, and you've kind of alluded to it, we get concerned around the jargon, we get concerned around the complexities and the like, and it's because it's not our skill set. But this is actually a fairly simple, and I would imagine a very common occurrence in your life. This is what day-to-day is, and we shouldn't get overwhelmed, and if we need help, reach out. But it's not actually that complex, notwithstanding there's terminology and jargon.
No, 100%. It's not as complicated as people think it is, and it's helpful to have someone that you can chat to as well. So if there is, specific questions or something that someone doesn't understand, that's why 10x is around. We want to help clients understand their investment. The more you understand your investment, the better you are at managing your investment, and just taking them through the process. I think, resigning and leaving a company is already stressful enough. Now you've got to look after where the money goes and the right place, and am I doing the right thing? Am I paying the right fees? So that's why I said, in terms of cost comparisons and using the calculators, very useful tools to kind of reinforce your decisions. You want to look out for hidden fees and any extra, costs that are going to eat away at your growth. Chat to a company like 10x where, we try and simplify things so that everyone can understand. And like I said, if everyone can understand their investments, they're actually eager to put more and more away, which is always great.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And remember, folks, it's about the EAC, effective annual cost. That is the number that matters. Not seeing any questions coming through. We will leave it there for now. Appreciate everyone's time logging in. As I said, the recording will be sent. Brett McKay, 10X Investments, really appreciate your insights today.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
Ladies and gents, everyone have a great day further. As always, look after yourself. If you can, look after somebody else as well. And if you're in Joburg, stay warm because it's cold out there. Actually, better yet, just don't even go out. Ladies and gents, have a great day further. Cheers all.